Hello and welcome to the Chess on Toast game of the day. We're looking at the Grand Prix tournament currently going on in Zug, Switzerland. My name's Nick Murphy, with me as always Lorin D'Costa. So Lorin, just before we start the game, I think we should tell everyone that we've got our new 3 DVDs coming out.
We do indeed. Would you like to explain which ones they're on?
I think we should, yes. We've got the DVD on the Milner-Barry Gambit.
That's right, we've also got the Evans Gambit.
And we've got the Bishop B5 Sicilian.
Exactly.
So check those out at www.chessontoast.com now. Right, Lorin, are you going to take us through a game from the round 1 of the Grand Prix tournament? Which one are we going to look at?
That's right, we're going to look at the game between Fabiano Caruana, who seems to be from every single country, but I think he's Italian right now, and Timur Radjabov, who is definitely Azerbaijanian. And these two actually are, from a coach's point of view, quite important players, because of course everyone knows they're top 10 players, but they're actually kind of known as child prodigies back in the day.
Right.
I say back in the day, they're quite old now, I suppose, at the early 20s stage. And they actually didn't play any of the openings that we just have covered in our own DVDs, Nick.
No.
They played something a little bit different, a little bit more sharper, which Radjabov himself has been known to play before. And the game started with e4, e5. Well, that we've already covered, but of course there are so many different variations here that white and black can play. Knight f3, attacking the pawn on e5. We all know this one before. And knight c6 defending it.
Yep.
And here, after the Spanish or Roy Lopez, there are countless lines that black could play in this position. Not exactly in this position, but sort of systems that he can set up from this position. But Radjabov is decided to kind of look at this new one called the Schliemann or the Janisch, depending on where you are from.
I think in one of our Game of the Days we saw them play a6 here, didn't we?
That's right, a6 is slightly more, well, the normal move to attack the bishop, and white has a choice of capturing the knight on c6 or dropping back to a4.
There's quite a lot of different choices there that you can do.
That's right. Yeah. But instead he decided to go for the juggler with f5, which at first sight looks a bit kind of committal and weird and strange, and any other adjective you want to throw in there.
Yeah, I mean, at first glance I'd sort of say it looks a little bit like he's weakening his king side.
Well, we always say to beginners and improving players, you don't really want to move that f-pawn, because if you do that you leave yourself wide open on this diagonal, and that queen on d1 would kind of fancies its chances on getting there. But the point about this is that the knight on f3 actually blocks the queen.
Right.
So it's not easy for white to get that queen all the way across to h5 just like that. And even if it does, black does have a g-pawn to get in the way. But more importantly is we don't have that queen h5 idea. And what do we do? I mean, do we take one of these pawns? Do we take on f5? Or do you want to try and play bishop takes c6 and then take on e5? Do they both look quite appetizing? Should white not do anything at all?
I mean, that looks okay for white. I mean, I suppose, the only thing is you sort of lost one of your good pieces with that bishop, but I think that looks okay from where it is there.
Well, now we are threatening this queen h5 move, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think black's best move is either to go... Well, knight f6 suggests itself here.
That stops the queen coming to h5.
That's right, prevents the queen coming to h5, and it attacks, of course, the pawn on e4. So white would probably have to do something like this to save the pawn. But after these moves, if I'm just going to play sort of regular moves like this, where both sides develop their pieces and towards the centre, we see a position that actually we're going to see is sort of similar to the game, where black is a pawn down, and it appears that he's a pawn down for pretty much nothing. But if you think about the piece development, black already has 3 pieces, and I suppose you can count the rook on the open file as well.
The rook's doing a lot.
So we're going to say 4 pieces, whereas white only has 2 pieces out into the game. So although white has no weaknesses in any pawn formation, black has this sort of lead and development. And if you think about from an attacking player's point of view, as black it's quite hard to get an attack quite quickly.
Yeah.
So a lot of people like this kind of opening for black by saying, well, it's only a pawn, and look what we've got. We've got a lot of piece development. We've got a lot of pieces pointing towards the black king. So we're fancying our chances of trying to do something with that at some point.
Is this technically a gambit?
It is indeed. It's like the Schliemann Gambit, or the Actually, they call it the Schliemann Defence, but I'm not really sure why it is. Maybe it's just one of those misnomers. Maybe someone played it and tried to confuse their opponents by saying it was a defence, when actually it's quite an attacking opening. So you see this position here, Nick, is going to be fairly similar to what we're going to see in the game.
Okay.
In terms of black gives up a pawn, but in fact he's trying to gain sort of an advantage with piece development. So, returning to position after f5, the latest trend in this line is actually to ignore this gambit and play d3. Just to quickly show the crazy stuff that I used to play, which is still playable nowadays, which is knight c3. And this allows some hugely complicated variations like this, where black now appears to gain a lot of time in the centre, but white can now respond by sacrificing a piece and then going for this.
Oh, I see. Yes, of course, because you'd have a fork if the pawn takes back.
That's right.
Like that with the bishop, you get a nice fork.
But black shouldn't be so helpful, I think, in that position. And in fact, he can just play queen g5, attacking the bishop on b5 and the pawn on g2.
Oh, crikey.
So this is a completely crazy position, which I won't go into. But suffice to say that people who play the Schliemann or the Danish defence tend to be kind of, I'm up for a fight right from the beginning and bring it on kind of thing. So knight c3, I feel, is playing into their hands a little bit. So people nowadays prefer this kind of d3 variation, which is exactly what Caruana played. So just not trying to refute black's opening, but just trying to say, well, I'm going to continue with normal moves like d3, get this bishop's line out towards the normal squares,
right,
and we'll just kind of play a normal game. So Radjabov swapped. Well, actually, if he plays knight f6, which is playable, I think now white is able to take on f5 because black doesn't have this e-pawn push. Bearing in mind that white's pawn is defending that
white's
square.
pawn can catch it back.
That's right. And e4 would be quite a good move. Why do you think black would be trying to go e4 in this position or in similar positions?
Just kick away that knight on f3, maybe?
That's right, yep. And then once that moves, we can sort of throw the d-pawn forward as well.
Yeah.
And getting that kind of...
advancing, getting space and things
that's right,
that.
kind of attacking openings. I think that's what we're trying to say here. This opening is very attacking, so for anyone looking for an attacking opening against the Roy Lopez Spanish, this might be one for you. A bit risky, but there you go, that's how it works.
That's how it works.
So, d3, and Radjabov took on e4, and then played knight f6, and white castled. So the question is, do you think black can grab a pawn on e4?
Seems far too simple to me, because then, okay, I'm just guessing here, you could put the rook onto e1, so you have to protect the knight. Ooh, gosh.
Can I go d5?
You can, and...
What do you think a good response would be?
I really want to do something. Well, you could take the pawn on e5.
Ah, well spotted.
Yes.
Well spotted. With the pin here. And this is one of the drawbacks, actually. We were saying about risk a minute ago.
Yeah.
Here we see exactly what we're talking about. That king on e8, with the bishop on b5, now pointing towards it. And now, queen h5 is a huge threat, isn't it? Because, let's say black goes bishop d7, just to show you what white's threatening. Queen h5 check, g6. How could white take advantage of this?
I think I know this one. Could black take the pawn on g6?
I think you mean white, but
white
we're going to go with that one. Knight
G6.
takes g6.
You
didn't
know
mean with
what
the
I
queen,
meant.
right? Okay.
Yeah, no, I meant with the knight.
And we have a pin down here. Now we've got a lovely discovered attack, and black is, unless I'm missing something completely obvious, it looks like black is in big trouble here. Because
you can't even bring the knight back.
And you can't even, and also we've got this pin down here, and it's just horrible for black.
That
So
looks pretty bad. Black's overextended a bit too early though.
That's right. So piece development, we talked about that, and Radjabov played bishop c5. Now the main line, without getting bogged down in too much like kind of chess theory, is to go queen d3, which is more than a one mover because black now cannot castle. What is the reason why?
Because you could threaten to put the queen onto c4.
We can go queen c4 check, winning the bishop with a double attack or a fork. So whilst queen d3 is a very kind of tricky move, black, if black is aware and has had his morning coffee, we'll see d6 defends the bishop. And now if black can castle, I think black could look to the future with optimism because we were going to have this open file, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've got lovely squares for the bishops. This bishop on c5 is also an excellent piece, attacking down onto f2. So you can see the reasons why a lot of people like this opening, can't you?
It seems
already
friendly.
after sort of 7 moves, if white's not careful, black can get... I mean, if I just show some moves like this, where both sides develop, I still think that black can be quite content with this position, can't he?
Certainly not worse, and has a good position.
Although even here, maybe just got to show a few tactics based on the loose king on g8. I think we can do moves like bishop takes c6 and then knight takes e5. Because after this, what's the move you showed earlier?
The bishop, the queen c4.
Queen c4 again. So whilst black has to be a little bit careful, or actually has to be very careful, as I said, for the person who wants to play attacking chess, this could be the one for you. So, returning to the actual position in the game with bishop c5, Caruana, these top players have analysed these openings in depth, and he came up with what looks like quite a simple way to win a pawn. And black just decided, well, not even bother to try and win that pawn back on e4. I'm going to castle and get my king into safety. Right, so, like I said at the intro, Nick, we talked about black losing a pawn. Does he have anything for it?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's certainly ahead in development a bit, and although he does have doubled pawns, but he has the rook on a nice open file that we talked about, and I think it's pretty easy to kick that knight off the e5 square with a pawn. You could easily just advance that pawn to d6 and kick that knight away.
And that would release the bishop on c8, wouldn't it?
For both bishop's diagonals.
So are we saying that black has compensation here?
I would say black looks okay.
Right. Well, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but would you?
I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, in my expert opinion, that's okay.
Right. So this is, I said, the new kind of way to play against it. Now, what Radjabov himself has faced, I think it was about 3 years ago. He played against this Polish grandmaster, who now played an interesting variation, bishop g5, which of course pins the knight. So black has no time to take on e4. So after queen e8, he took the knight, and obviously his knight's being attacked here, so he moved it back to d3, which saves the knight and also simultaneously attacks the bishop on c5.
Right.
So black has now no time to capture the pawn on e4. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So when the bishop moved, white played knight d2, and after a couple of moves, I think something like this happened, where actually black didn't get any compensation at all, and he lost. Radjabov actually lost this game, but no doubt there were improvements. I remember seeing a game, I think it was in the Women's World Championships a year ago, where one of the top female players actually won a really nice game with some kind of idea with rook h6 and queen h5, and something happened down here. So maybe Caruana decided, well, do you know what? I'm not going to play into that bishop g5 line, and he's actually come up with something new. So he played knight c3. Well, that looks quite obvious. And Radjabov played d6, which was the move that you mentioned, Nick, wasn't it? So
I know, me and Radjabov picking the same moves all the time.
One move doesn't count as a...
I'm taking it.
Well, I'm not going to argue with that. Fair enough. Right, so, can white capture on c6?
I'm a bit worried about the knight getting stuck over there. I mean, at first glance, yes, but I think that bishop's going to come out and attack it.
Well, it's got a5, hasn't it?
But then it's not a very good square for it to be on.
Watch the queen as well.
I was watching the queen. So the queen could come to something like...
Where's the square it's been going to, generally?
Oh, e8?
E8, yep. And that would attack the knight and the pawn. So I think, after something like knight a5... I just think this is far too dangerous. In fact, maybe there's some interesting lines with bishop a6 attacking the rook e1, and maybe black can try some really clever idea like knight g4. And here we see the exact point of black's setup.
Oh, you can't just take the knight with the queen.
Well, I think you can, but then you lose the rook, don't you?
Nice.
And after king here, bishop takes e1.
Threatening mate.
White can go here, threatening mate on black, but what can black
got a
do?
powerful back rank mate!
Black can get white first. Whilst we don't expect that with top quality level chess...
No, this isn't the sort of stuff you'd expect.
It just goes to show, doesn't it, how white should be a bit careful.
But certainly for the junior improving level, that's the sort of things that can happen, isn't
Absolutely, and I actually think the Schliemann is one we should be looking at in a future DVD.
Well, there you go, we might just do that.
Thank you, Mr. Radjabov. But instead Caruana played the slightly, odd-looking move, knight a4. So we always talk about knights on the room being dim, but here we've seen the power of that bishop all the way on f2. And you see how the bishop now cannot stay on that diagonal, because if it drops back to b6, the knight can just capture it.
There's no safe squares on that diagonal.
So maybe this is quite an interesting idea from Caruana. If we take this... the knight, I think we can swap queens and take on c5, and white's just clearly better. A pawn up with black's shattered pawns. So probably this idea, knight c3, d6, knight a4 here, could be possibly a mini refutation. Maybe black has to go back to the drawing board here, because as we see in the game, Radjabov didn't really seem to get hold of this. Here we see that knight d3 move again that we talked about a few minutes ago, if you care to remember. And I think that after the following moves, we reached a position where I don't think this is really what Radjabov wanted. I mean, those 3 pawns there look horrendous.
Double pawns being bad, well, triple pawns, I guess, are at least 50% worse.
50%? Okay, yeah. I can't do the maths at this time anyway. And here we now go through a sort of positional phase. And I think Caruana's white would have been extremely happy to see this because he stopped black with any of that attacking ideas. Well, sort of, as we see. And what happens is, in the game where the pawns on the queen's side, which are these ones over here, they just end up getting captured. And I think this is a pretty terrible experience for Radjabov to have to deal with, because if we just skip through the next couple of moves, just to say one tactical point, if queen takes c5, what do you think a good black move would be here? Why did he not do this? Why did Caruana not take it?
I'm not sure. Maybe something like bishop d5?
Yeah, bishop d5, or maybe even has bishop h3, which is, as a chess coach, I see this one quite a lot.
Yep.
Trying to attack down here. So Caruana decided just to keep his queen in the kind of centre and cover everything. So if bishop h3 now
you could just put...
what can he do to defend?
Oh, I actually don't know.
We don't want to play g3, do we? Because we
lose the rook.
I think you can just go f3.
Ah, right, yes, fair enough.
But maybe this is what you should have done anyway, because after rook e8, black actually has a threat in this position, which is...
threaten...
The queen is overloaded,
Yep.
defending too many things.
So you could just take the bishop, the queen, and if the queen takes back, it's checkmate.
Excellent. Rook takes e3 as a threat. So maybe this was playable. Obviously, they would have seen this. Not quite sure. Maybe he thought that white would now just go back and maybe go somewhere better with his queen, like queen h4 or something, and then drop the queen back to g3. But then this allows black to take on c2. So I'm not quite sure as to why. Maybe Radjabov was, that fighting spirit we talked about. Maybe he just thought, well, don't want to draw. But over the next few moves, you'll see that black doesn't really achieve much. I'm just going to skip through the next few moves because you'll probably see that both sides manoeuvre a little bit, but not really achieving much.
So it's not really a sort of tactical. This is more just trying to improve the position of their pieces. And
that's right. It's all a case of white needs to defend that pawn from black's attack. Black tries to sacrifice on there. White prevents it, as we see here. White's big pieces just sitting around waiting. And eventually what happens is white tries to exchange off. And this is a really clever idea. Because if he manages to do that, then these pawns on the queen side are going to look really bad, aren't they? I mean, already, look, we've got this bishop attacking down onto c7, so white can probably win at least one.
Yeah.
And just a tactical point. What happens if rook takes e5 here? Why is that?
Because now if you took back with the rook, and then took back with the other rook, and then took... Oh.
It's not that easy. It's not that obvious. But how many pieces are defending that rook? We have... Two pieces. So how can we eliminate one of those?
Take the queen now.
Yeah, we can throw in an intermezzo with this, and then take the rook.
Right.
It wasn't that obvious, and I think in a real game you'd have spotted that.
Oh, I would have spotted it if I'd have had a bit more time. But
I'll give you the benefit of the doubt there. I'm not sure. Jury's still out on that one. So Radjabov decided king g8, but actually eventually the pieces came off, and this was a really nice move, bishop c3, because after the trade of rooks, why cannot black take on e3?
Because
you got 10 seconds.
It's mate.
It's mate. I was hoping you'd spot that. Good. So they actually entered a endgame after this, and this is another really clever move by Caruana, because he now spots that this pawn is going to be a goner, isn't it? Look.
Yeah.
If black takes on e3, white takes on f5 with check, king has to move somewhere, and white will win a pawn, and then he's going to set about trying to go after these guys, and this would be a really tough position for Radjabov to have to play. Notice, by the way, white's immensely safe king here, and Caruana following the rule that Philidor said back in the mid-1700s, all those years ago, which is, well, if you have a bishop on a certain colour, you should be putting your pawns on opposite colour of the bishop.
Right.
So here we see most of white's pawns are on opposite colour of the bishop, whereas black's pawns, well, they're just weak anyway, generally. So this is such a bad position for black, and the best he can do is draw, really. So in the game, queen f4 was played, but this didn't really save much, because now rook a3, and this is exactly what black was trying to avoid. this endgame where the pawns would actually be quite weak. And where's black's attack anymore? It's kind of
There
disappeared, doesn't it?
Yeah, there isn't really one.
So Radjabov kicked around a little bit like this. He lost 2 pawns in a row there. Bishop came to b4. He threw in another one. Maybe, well, he can't really take on a2.
So he's just basically 3 pawns down now, isn't he?
Yeah, you can't. He just basically lost all his pawns in a row, and it must have been a really horrible thing to see. He tried to win one back, but he ended up losing another one. And the h pawn finally goes. Notice that this formation here is a very strong one, isn't it?
Yeah.
They both protect each other, the bishop and the pawn, and that means that this pawn is absolutely useless now, because how is it going to get to there?
Yes, you see, black's bishop, which is on the light squares, can't do anything to stop them because they're both on dark squares. The rook doesn't want to sacrifice itself for pieces of a lower value, and the black isolated pawn can't advance.
And white will have 3 passed pawns here only. So he tried one more trick. What happens if rook takes h4?
You could now take the pawn on f3.
Good, with a pin across here.
Yeah.
But Caruana's never going to fall for that one in a million years. So he went king g1, and after a few checks, he decided that was enough. In fact, here he resigned because rook takes h4. So when you play a risky opening, I think the one thing to take away from this is, risky openings are good, but you might come across a good opponent who will just nullify your attack, and you'll end up with a whole load of weaknesses, as we saw here. But I still think that this, at club level or improvers level, the Schliemann or Janisch is probably quite a good one to consider if you don't want to play something pretty boring and standard. So I think it's a kind of like it's a mix, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the openings that we've covered in our DVDs. So basically, not necessarily ones that the top players would recommend for them. But if black is very prepared, or the opponent's very prepared, then the opponent can be okay. But in actual fact, there's lots of tricks and traps, and you can see that even here, right at the very top level.
Exactly. So I think the Schliemann might be one for a future Chess on Toast, I think.
Oh, well, I'll look forward to that. Thank you very much, Lorin. Very exciting game from round 1 of the Grand Prix. We'll be back with another game very soon.